Hello, everybody. Once again, it's time for FAA Safety Briefing Live, and we're happy to present the January-February issue of 2022. I'm Paul Pradecker.
And I'm Susan Parson.
Well, as always, it's nice to work with you and to be in the Arizona time zone compared to Wisconsin. So,
well, I think it's the Arizona temperature that you like better than the time zone.
Indeed, you're correct about that. And as again, we sort of introduced the concepts about this magazine and what FAA Safety Briefing is trying to accomplish. So,
sure. Well, we took off the 60th anniversary because we're now in our next 60-year cycle, I guess, or
okay.
Next decade. So we aim to be the safety policy voice for non-commercial general aviation. And you see the goals there: to raise awareness of FAA resources, to explain safety and regulatory issues from an authoritative point of view, and to encourage continued training, which is very important to all of us.
And one of the things I'd like to just mention about the continued training, this issue is devoted largely to all things medical and medical certification. It's especially important for pilots, but also for instructors, because as a CFI, one of the first questions, as you well know, you might receive is, from a new learner is, well, what about this medical? What do I need to do? So this would be a very good resource for CFIs to help guide learners through this process.
Well, I think so. And another word about the magazine: each of our departments, each of our regular departments has a specific focus or mission statement, and we try to stick to that, and you see them there on the page. So that's kind of how we put every issue together.
And specifically to this issue, we've got 5 main articles in addition to some other supporting materials. So take us through those, Susan.
So we're going to start off with BasicMed is turning 5, a little bit of a review of an important development for many pilots. Speeding up certification, human factors, the fact that the aerospace medical folks in our organization have lots and lots of courses, sources, and training resources. So this is part of what you were talking about with the CFIs. And we'll also look at who's who in the Office of Aerospace Medicine. I think it's really important. We try to introduce someone, as we do in this issue, FA Faces, but we try to get across the idea that we're people too, and we're aviators too, and we care. So to take away, to provide a little bit of information on the names and faces, not just the organization.
Well, I think that's important, and especially for the new federal air surgeon, who is a very strong advocate of general aviation.
Absolutely.
And has her airplanes, and I think she completely understands, the medical certification process and what some of the challenges, but also what some of the remedies are that she's pursuing.
Absolutely.
So the first column, which we always start out with, is Jump Seat, prepared by
one of my bosses,
one of your bosses in Flight Standards, Rico. He talks about some of the progress they've made, but the main point was that just like we pre-flight and monitor the condition of our airplane, we need to do the same with ourselves.
Well, and that regular visits to the doctor, even if it's not something you want to do, are as important as regular visits for your airplane to the mechanic, which you might not like to do because of the cost of it. But anyway, there's been a lot of positive developments over the years, right? Really just since I've started working for the FAA. Medical certification staff has done a lot to speed up issuance. The compliance program is the philosophy of that is explained there. And then there's BasicMed, which, as it puts it at the bottom, no excuse for anything but a full and frank discussion with your physician.
Well, and the spirit too of the compliance program is all about risk management, and that has taken on a theme and a variety of presentations that we've made, but it's the heart of the ACS, and how we can be advocates for our own, medical certification and examine some of the risk.
Now, the other thing this article points out, and you're going to see this throughout this particular issue of the magazine, things that you can do, things that you should do to ease and speed your medical certification. But If you think you might have an issue, get the facts. There are lots of sources for facts nowadays. Use your resources, which can include aviation advocacy organizations. Resolve the problem. That's the most important thing for your health and everything else. Work with your physician and then document. And we'll talk in this magazine, in this issue, about what, not for specific conditions, of course, but ways that you can learn what the FAA needs, what you need to provide, and how you need to provide it. So it's all about making it easier for everybody.
And the reference to aviation organizations, I mean, certainly the general aviation industry is represented by a variety of associations that have medical help desk and helping with certification, but also in the Part 121 world, many of the pilot union and pilot associations have the same benefits. If you've got questions about certification, or perhaps a group, thinking about a medical condition and wonder how that will affect, it's a phone call away, and often the answers are same day. So it's a great resource. And so BasicMed, was in the works for a number of years. It's turned 5 years.
5 years now. So,
and it provides a mechanism for people who may not otherwise be able to fly and to get a medical, an avenue for certification. I well remember early on in the days of, the beginnings of BasicMed, there were concerns of, safety. And some information has come out about that.
Well, as you'll see on the far left there, and including in the magazine more detail, the FAA and the NTSB have just completed a required report to Congress summarizing findings of the first 3 years of BasicMed, because that was the data that were available. And the next to the last bullet on the left there, the study concluded no difference in the risk. So I think that was positive news for everybody who advocated for BasicMed. What this article actually does is it summarizes what it is and isn't. It's an alternative to the third-class medical. It's not a quote-unquote fourth-class certificate. It goes through the basics of what you need to do, and over on the far right are the foundational requirements for airmen, aircraft, and operations under BasicMed. But I think one of the points that we really want to make throughout this issue, you'll see it in various places, 6153 prohibits you from acting as PIC if you know of any condition that would make you unable to operate the aircraft in a safe manner. So it doesn't matter what kind of certificate or certification or qualification you have. You've got to make sure before every single flight that you're safe to fly. And
this article does a really good job of summarizing, the basics of what you need. It certainly covers, the standpoint of the airman, what kind of aircraft you can fly, and the ability to fly in the national airspace system without a lot of restrictions. No more than 250 knots, no more than 18,000 feet, stay within the United States, no compensation for hire. However, there is some guidance about if you're a flight instructor, you can operate under BasicMed. So when I think about some of the issues we've done, and we've referenced the new federal air surgeon, she's made a big point about saying we're trying to get to yes in certification, and BasicMed is certainly one of those mechanisms that as we'll go through, if you look at the article in print, over 5 years, it's about 50,000.
It's a lot.
There's a lot of people now are able to enjoy the industry, enjoy flying, and have an avenue for renewal beyond that. And there's also some good advice in here about if you need a special issuance, how that can impact and be involved in the BasicMed certification process. So if it's something you're considering, it's a great resource. And there's links, of course, on the medical certification website of the FAA.gov website that can lead you through a lot of this.
Oh, absolutely.
So I like this title because it immediately made me think of a couple of other things that I've been involved in the past. smooth as fast. And I mean, what they're really talking about is how to get ready to go through the process of certification in terms of getting everything in order. But I had two hobbies from some time ago, and both instructors in those hobbies used the same reference. One was in target shooting with a handgun coming out of a holster. That was a timed event. I did training where I was required to fire so many shots, and I think it was 4 seconds or something like that. And it didn't seem like that was near enough time. So in my head, I was very quick, and the instructor said, "You're not going to be quick if you're abrupt and doing, abrupt movements, and you need to give the impression that you're being very smooth. And the way to do that is to actually take a breath, take your time, and you'll have plenty of time." And I had the same discussion with golf, that if you're trying to have some agility in the game of golf, your actions need to be smooth, not necessarily abrupt and powerful. In fact, I read a book a long time ago that said the key to a successful golf swing is to have effortless power rather than a powerful effort.
Oh, I like that. I'll have to remember that.
So all of this to say, here's how you can get your paperwork in order and get through this process.
Well, it's about not being panicky, not just throwing documents at the FAA, not sending things in piecemeal. There's some reassuring information. I put that in italics over on the left-hand side. You might not meet the regular medical standards, but there are other options. Special issuance is one. The statement of demonstrated ability is another. There are means of medical compliance like BasicMed, we talked about, sport pilot, and aircraft that don't require a medical certificate at all. Balloons and gliders come to mind. Mm-hmm. But the real key in getting your medical certificate is to do the smooth and maybe not as fast as you might think you should, but getting everything together. Documents need to be legible with name and date and identification numbers. Letters are signed and dated. It's probably amazing how many are not. Include all the information the FAA is requesting. Here's another big one. I think keep a copy of everything you've submitted and make sure that they have your contact information.
Of course, yeah.
So this also talks about a couple of other resources. One is the conditions AMEs can issue. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. And you'll see several references throughout the magazine. This guide for aviation medical examiners. It's obviously intended for AME.
I didn't realize that we could look at that.
Sure you can.
Yeah.
And in fact, the Aerospace Medicine Office encourages people to look at that because you can see what exactly is required. You can see what the FAA is asking AMEs to do. And so it's written for doctors, but it is available to anybody online. And then you have real people you can reach out to.
Well, and on the left side of your slide, there's a couple of nice pieces of information. One is that if you do need a special issuance, it will first have to go through the Aerospace Medical Certification Division. However, there are many other special issuances that when its time comes for renewal, they can be dealt with at another level, which is a more streamlined process. And then the SOTAs, I mean, there's a variety of conditions that might require a SOTA. I've certainly color vision is one. Yeah. One of my most favorite students a long time ago had lost his sight in one eye, and he had a SOTA where he basically had to fly down the runway at a certain height just to show he had the depth perception. So they're all workable things. You just have to know what the resources are and get everything in line. As I'm reading this, I'm also thinking about doing my taxes, and it's the same principle. Maybe
get it all together.
Get it all together, and
Yeah, I got to do that too. Okay. Well, another thing is it's about getting it together, but it's about getting the information, and I think that's one of the points that is stressed repeatedly in the articles in this issue, starting with what was in the front article in Jump Seat. Get information. There's no excuse these days not to get information from the FAA directly or from aviation organizations, the advocacy organizations, from the internet, although obviously you have to make sure that it's a reputable source.
Of course.
But there's a lot of information out there to help these days that wasn't around when you and I were learning to fly.
No. No.
Yeah. Right.
No, it was, we were sort of at the mercy of just maybe one person's information,
right,
and
whatever you could find.
Exactly. Yeah.
We're not that old though.
Uh,
Feels like it. This page is here just as actually it's an encouragement to go actually look at the magazine. It has some charts like the conditions that AMEs can issue, the conditions that are in that program. They're expanding all the time, and there are worksheets that can be used to for the AME to go through. And then this 5 tips to fast track your medical. Some of that we've already talked about, but this page gives a little bit more information about each one of the points that were on the previous slide.
I mean, the basics are to list all your conditions, find out before you show up to your appointment what documents you need to bring to your appointment. Make sure that you're having a chat with your physician about your what the medical certification process is like, so he or she understands. Have a frank discussion with your AME, and then make sure you submit your information timely. I mean, it's all the basics. And on the right, these are conditions that perhaps at one time or another might have either required a deferred medical, or action that was slower, or maybe no medical certification. But this is a kind of a short list. I think the article says there's 30 now conditions that AMEs can issue, and there's worksheets to help you to go through all of this. So again, this is just part of the process of being an advocate for yourself and leading the way to getting a medical certificate. So,
and I would point out too that the FAA is constantly looking at expanding this list of conditions that AMEs can issue. So.
Well, and we'll talk about this later, but it's the same with medications.
Oh, sure.
Sure. I like this next one. It's got a little personal story.
Hey, I like pizza.
Yeah, it's got a little personal story that you brought into it, but also Dr. Northrup makes a very good point.
Yeah, rather than my story, I'd really want to focus on the reason I call this article the pizza principle. I sat in one of the not the front row, but I think the next one back at Oshkosh this past summer when the administrator did his presentation. And there was a question that came up for Dr. Northrup, and she stood up and she says, I know why you're frustrated, and I get it. And we've got lots of work to do, and we're working on it. But she told us, she started out with this story about how if you go and order a pizza, which we did the other day, you order a pizza and you can see when it was ordered, and some sites will even let you track the construction of your pizza, when it goes into the oven, when the driver gets it, or when it's ready to pick up. So her view is, well, if you can do that with a pizza, you should be able to do that with your medical certificate. Because what frustrates people is that you send in all this paperwork and it goes into what seems like a black hole. You don't have anybody you can ask. You don't have anything that you can see. But they are working on a system that will allow you to track your medical just the same way you track your pizza. I can't wait to see it.
I would say that there's a lot of people who might be hungry for that.
That's a very good way to put it.
Very good. So our next one is about, the whole process. It's not just your AME. There's a lot of people behind the scenes in the aerospace medicine office. And this is kind of a nice review of who's doing what.
Of who's doing what. In the pizza principle, I had an italicized piece over there you may have noticed that said that Dr. Northrup and her team are very committed to this getting to yes. And I didn't realize, I think I kind of knew, but this article makes it clear how many of our medical decision makers are active or former pilots. And our federal air surgeon herself, she flies a Stearman and a Texan, and she's from a flying family. And she says, I've heard her say it personally, I really understand how important this is to pilots. So this explains the aerospace medicine is a big organization with lots of divisions. There's headquarters. There's the Civil Aeromedical Institute in Oklahoma. There are lots of different, there's the regional flight surgeons and then the different divisions that we'll talk about. But the ones that we focus on in this article, the Aerospace Medical Certification Division, this is where your special issuance is processed, and they have a huge workload.
Well, the numbers are impressive, 380,000 medical applications and 34,000 SIs a year.
It's a lot. But they are also responsible for MedExpress, the Aerospace Medical Certification Subsystem, and things. I mean, these are sort of abstract things, but the document imaging workflow system, those are very important in getting this processing done. Aerospace Medical, the Medical Specialties Division, they look at the policies and standards, behavioral health questions a lot, and I think they're very pleased with this new doctor of clinical pharmacy who's very helpful with the medications.
Yeah, it's clear that there's a lot going on behind the scenes, and I mean, even going back to the whole Medical Express or MedExpress application, I mean, even that was a way to streamline things.
Oh, absolutely.
Human factors. This is always important because, I mean, this largely addresses, fatigue. And I'm sure every pilot out there has flown tired or fatigued.
Really?
Really? Yes. I can relate to some of my experiences.
I know, I'm just being facetious.
As a flight instructor for an airline where we didn't have any simulators, so we had to fly and teach on the airplane, but we could only do that in the middle of the night because the planes were being used for revenue flights during the day. I remember I was trying to adjust to the sort of midnight to 4:30 routine, and somebody told me, "Oh, you'll get used to it," and I said, "I don't want to get used to this. I mean, this is not what I want to do." But it's a good article about acute fatigue as well. Maybe we just had a late night, whereas chronic fatigue is ongoing. And the one thing that caught my attention in this is that the chronic fatigue, you might not realize that you have it because it could just feel like, well, this is your norm.
Well, and I thought it was interesting that when they talk about chronic fatigue and research into how you detect it, because as you say, you may be so used to it that you don't even notice, but they're using biomarkers and doing research into biomarkers, molecular biomarkers, and that's something that the Aerospace Medical Research Division is doing. Because fatigue has been a factor in so many accidents and incidents. Human factors in general, human factors is, sounds like an abstract term, but it's essentially the study of how humans interact with their environment. So CAMI is doing a lot of research into that. And
I noticed that also for air traffic, for air traffic controllers especially.
Well, and the Flight Deck Human Factors Research Laboratory, human factors in the flight deck. There have been accidents and incidents where, including some fairly recent ones, where I think there is a growing realization that is the subject of this research that, okay, so you have an alarm for this, an alarm for that, an alarm for the other, but I mean, if too many alarms are going off, the human brain can't comprehend it. So,
well, and I remember reading, I don't know where this was, but it's a popular concept that if you're fatigued can also change your performance the same way that being under the influence can.
I've seen that.
So to me, that's really kind of says it all. It's something we have to pay attention to. And the one thing that the article goes into some detail is that the FAA has reached out to collaborate with industry and academia to do some of this research and to gather the data. There's a reference in there to working with Washington State University on some projects. And in my former 121 life, we actually worked with Washington State University.
Oh, wow.
And one of the pilot associations, we were asked to examine the difference between a long haul flight as it related to performance indicators compared to an equivalent number of hours, but divided into 5 shorter flights. We basically donated the simulator for about a month for this project, and the instructors and the pilots were put into the simulator just like a normal flight, and we had paperwork and flight releases and everything. And in one case, we did 1 8-hour flight. And then in the other case, we did 5 shorter flights that equaled 8 hours. And the reason we picked 8 hours, of course, was because of the duty time day. And then the researchers from Washington State had a mechanism and a tool to look at reaction times. And for example, they would put one of their measuring devices, in the pilot and say, okay, we're going to look at performance. And it was basically a device to measure reaction time. And at the end of the day, they found that the 5 flights were more contributing to performance reduction and fatigue than 1 8-hour flight. I'm not sure I would respond that way, but that's over, I think it was 25 pilots it turned out to be. That was the data that they came up with.
Well, flight instructors should keep that in mind.
Indeed.
Because
Yes.
flight instructors are doing very intense,
Multiple flights
a day, different lengths, probably different temperatures depending on go out in the morning or come out in the evening. So I think even though some of this research is immediately directed to commercial aviation, it really does have implications for everybody.
Absolutely. And one of the offshoots of all of the research on fatigue, of course, has been in the Part 121 world, the development of Part 117, which is the flight duty rules, which have had a big impact on how flights are scheduled and how crew members need required rest. And so there's a big move to tighten that up and to address that it's a real issue.
Absolutely.
Faces. FAA Faces. So Dr. David Hardy.
Yeah, he has recently been appointed as the manager of the Aerospace Medical Education Division, which does a lot of different things: seminars for new and renewing physicians, safety briefings, and this is the stuff that pilots really enjoy. Training of spatial or disorientation, hypoxia recognition and survival, library support, publications, a little bit of everything. Dr. Hardy, I noticed he has a Boston accent. It says you'll recognize him from that. I haven't had an opportunity to meet or talk to him yet, but yeah, he's had a background that includes military as well as civilian, and thousands of hours as a military flight surgeon. So he's done a lot of different stuff.
Well, and the Aerospace Medical Education Division, of course, is responsible for educating 2 groups. I mean, the AMEs, but also the pilot groups.
But also the pilot community. And I knew one of his predecessors quite well. We would meet up at Oshkosh every year, and he was very enthusiastic about, we've got all this neat stuff, and we've got this, and we've got that, and we've got the other. And we actually have some information coming up on some of the things that are in development. Okay.
Here's a fun little thing, aeromedical crossword puzzle.
Yeah, we've done this. I think we did it once before. I think it may be in the surface safety issue. I can't remember.
It could be, but once again, it would help if you read the issue, because then the answers will be a lot easier.
Well, the answers are easier, but this is I think that the team did a really great job coming up with this, because it turns out it's a whole lot harder to write and develop things like a crossword puzzle than you might think. So they spent a lot of time in doing it, but the idea was to give you another opportunity to interact with the material in a different way, maybe to reinforce some of the concepts, but also just to be more engaging.
Yeah, and it's fun.
It is fun.
Yeah. This is a great review by your colleague Jennifer on some of the resources. there's so much information available. The article talks about the aviation physiology course. There's human factors. There's the pilot minute video series, the AME minute, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Courses on the entire medical certification process, safety brochures, and all of this, of course, is at no cost. And then there's two other things. One's well known, and one I just learned about.
Yeah, so the article has some pictures that go with it, but this is about educational programs. This is the thing that Dr. Hardy is the newly named manager of. Educational programs and hands-on training to help pilots recognize, and aircrew recognize and manage, it says, the physical and mental stresses of flight. So the thing that they're really excited about right now is, I'm not sure how they plan to pronounce it, Y-Waves, but it's the Wind and Wave Evacuation and Survival Facility. It's basically a giant pool that will allow all kinds of water survival scenarios, getting out of an aircraft.
Is it being built in Oak City?
I believe it is being built in Oklahoma City. So I don't recall right off, I think it's in the article, what the timing is for opening, but I think it will provide lots of opportunities and to be much more realistic than anything that we can do right now.
Sure.
This is state of the art. Then they have the PROTI, the Portable Reduced Oxygen Training Enclosure, which is a traveling altitude training device. And it's got, the article talks about what you have to do to be eligible, but basically it's pilots 18 with a valid medical certificate. But
have you done something similar?
I have. I did an altitude chamber at Andrews Air Force Base years ago when I was doing my high altitude endorsement, and it's definitely something that is worth trying to experience.
I have never done it, but I've certainly had experiences with higher altitude operations, and even just geographically. Years ago, I used to teach in Denver, and where I was staying was up at about the 8,500 foot level, and people I was staying with would often make the comment, "Oh, isn't the air great here?" And I would say, "Well, yes, if you can get some of it, it is." And every time I went there, it was a headache for a day, and eventually it got better. And that was at 8,500 feet, and cabins of aircraft and commercial airlines are often pressurized to about that altitude. And of course, it doesn't take too long to get above that in a non-pressurized general aviation airplane. So it's good to know what your baseline would be, to know when you would be susceptible to the effects of high altitude.
Well, before I took I did the altitude chamber, which was very interesting. Just it allows you to see what your individual reaction is. But and you'd be amazed when when you're oxygen deprived and they ask you to write stuff, and then you look at it later and go, what did I do? Mm-hmm. It turns out for me it was kind of graying out from the outside in. But another sign, and I actually experienced this because I was with several other pilots years ago going out. We were crossing Lake Michigan in a Bonanza. And we went at a very high altitude because, as the owner of the airplane says, I don't like to get wet.
Yeah, got that.
But he was kind of right on the edge of where he should have been. And I ended up with a wicked headache that lasted for quite some time. And I realized later that it was, even though we were perfectly legal, there was definitely less oxygen at that.
Well, and the other thing this program does too is it teaches you about time of useful consciousness.
Yes.
I remember, was it 2020? Yes, it was. In 2020 when I was doing medical transport flights in the Lear. All right, the Lear was, pretty capable of going to 39, 41, 43,000 feet. And I was always making sure that our pre-flight included a review of that the masks were proper, that they were attached. And if I heard something that I didn't want to hear, what would my actions be to get it?
Immediate, right?
Yeah, the other reaction I had, being at like 43,000 feet, was I looked out the window and I just thought, I hope I don't fall out. You know, I mean, it just seems pretty high.
It is high.
So what's Pilot Minute about?
So the FAA Aerospace medical people already produced something called the AME Minute, which covers medical policy, and it's kind of like the AME guide that we talked about and talk about again here. It was produced and developed for aerospace medical examiners, AMEs, but gosh, it's awfully useful to pilots as well. But now they are producing another video about monthly. It's called the Pilot Minute, and it features Dr. Susan Northrup, who's the federal air surgeon. It's part of her effort to have more open communication with pilots. This is the Airman Education team doing it, and they're looking at medical issues and pilots' concerns. And she's hosted the first two. I'm not sure if the intent is for her to host all of them, but when I mean, they're great. They show her pre-flighting the Stearman and then taking off in that airplane. And that is her grass strip. I mean, she said, that's my backyard. That's what she told me.
The nice thing about this is that it puts her face into the community. She's not somebody who's actually behind the scenes. I mean, she's actively involved in promoting
aviation, and part of an aviation family and everything else. So this is another way, and I call it straight from the source, because I'm going straight to the FAA with this or some of the other resources. This is how you get information that you need.
Well, and the third bullet, comments about, FAA Safety Briefing. There's typically 2 articles dedicated to medical issues and advice.
And speaking of that, this next one is about drugs. Mind your meds. This is the Aeromedical Advisory written by the federal air surgeon. And one of the things, people are always asking, is this okay or is that okay? How do we know what medications are all right? Well, they're trying to develop a guide to make it more clear what is and isn't acceptable. But this article provides, and it had to be summarized for here, but it's a fair amount of detail about medications that are usually acceptable, but there are always exceptions.
Always exceptions, but usually is a good word.
And then the unacceptable for flight, those are pretty much a no way, no how, not going to happen.
And I mean, some of them are obviously they're muscle relaxers, they're sleep-inducing agents, but the one that gets people caught off guard sometimes is Benadryl. It's in sleep medications, it's in cough and cold medications, allergies, and it's easily obtained, and it's a problem for flight.
Well, in fact, it's the most common medication seen in fatal aircraft accidents. I like there are a couple of thoughts that are in this article that I think are worth remembering. One is, if you need medication for something, flying is not a good idea, especially for cold. And in the little box at the bottom, when in doubt, ask your AME, because your personal physician may not understand the implications for flying. But you can ask this simple question: would you feel safe on an airplane if your pilot was using this medication? And if the answer is no, that's a pretty good indication that you shouldn't do it.
But there's other parts of this too about the dosing, and if you need a cold medication, okay, fine, but there has to be some time. You can't, take your last dose this morning and say, well, I'm going to go fly at noon. There has to be some time where the life of the drug has, been purged. So pay attention to that and get some advice. And there's a lot of it that's available on the aviation websites. And then there's all of the over-the-counter medication. And as we were preparing for this, I was, thinking that medication is the answer for everything if you look at TV, because you can't watch a program without some prescription medicine being advertised, listing all of the side effects, which are typically significant. And it's the same with over-the-counter.
Exactly. They list all the side effects in either tiny type at the bottom or in a really auctioneer fast kind of voice. So you're kind of listening going, wait, but most of them now I've seen and heard so many times, I think I could probably say it for them. But over-the-counter medicine, we tend to think, oh, well, that's not a problem. But we've talked about the fact that Benadryl certainly is.
All of the antihistamines and even the painkillers with a sleep agent like the PM type of medications. Well, those are using the same drugs as Benadryl or a derivative of an antihistamine that might induce drowsiness. That's why it's a sleep medication.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, if it says do not operate heavy machinery, that includes airplanes.
Indeed.
Even if you have a light airplane. Another thing that I think we get a lot of questions about now is CBD products. The FAA strongly discourages using these products if you are in aviation.
Well, and it's simply because supplements like that are not regulated.
They're not regulated and we don't know what they are. Another thing, this is another plug for the AME guide. There is a do not issue, do not fly section that includes some of the commonly used OTC medications that are safe and those that are not. So it's just another great resource that you can use.
But there's also a guide about what is safe, and those that list is increasing as more and more drugs are evaluated and
well, and that's something that the clinical pharmacist is now part of the FAA doing. Yeah.
I was interested to see this article, ADHD. I mean, I think we all know in general what it is. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But the one thing that I did not actually connect the dots on was that there are some people who might also present impulsivity.
Mm-hmm.
And impulsivity in flying is typically, I don't know if I throw it into a hazardous attitude, but certainly that could be the outcome.
Well, it talks about the subtypes of ADHD, which
Mm-hmm.
I had not heard about. Predominantly inattentive, predominantly hyperactive or impulsive, and then
Mm-hmm.
the combined presentation, and all three can pose a hazard to flight safety. And in the red section in the middle, NTSB investigations have shown that this really is a problem. So ADHD is considered a disqualifying condition, and a lot of the medications for ADHD are also disqualifying because of the side effects that they can have. So thorough evaluation, special issuance is possible, but like all special issuances, it would be time limited with monitoring and assessment required.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this has been an increasing issue over the years.
Well, and simple examples that, if you're presenting, these symptoms, it might be easy to skip over a pre-flight, miss, getting the weather, things like that.
Yep.
And then in flight, perhaps making impulsive decisions, which are not always the best.
Exactly.
This is our nuts, bolts, and electrons, and about the new service difficulty reporting
system. Yeah, there's the so I think of this as kind of part of the keeping your airplane healthy.
Mm-hmm.
It's aerospace medicine for the machines themselves. But there's a new service difficulty reporting system, refreshed, updated, personalized, and packed with new features is the tagline there. You can find everything you need on the navigation bar. You can use one click to create a malfunction or defect report. There are FAQs, there's what's new. And this is really important because the data that you provide in an SDR is data that we can use to improve safety, identify equipment malfunctions, help manufacturers, help the FAA, help your fellow pilots.
And not only is it a system for input, there's also a system for output where you can review other issues that might be associated with your engine, your part, your airplane, and see what other people have reported.
It's like anything else. It's a form of crowdsourcing in a way. I always think I talked about pirates as crowdsourcing weather. I mean, it's the more people who contribute to it, the better the information is and the more accurate it is.
Well said. We often see this checklist,
yes.
the I'm safe checklist.
Yeah.
But this is all about how it should be applied to drone operators of any type of operation, whether it's under 107 or under some, the exception for limited operations, but also for the observers, if you have a team of observers.
Well, the thing about drones is that you have the remote pilot, but very often you have visual observers. You really have a crew. And
Sure.
So we talked in previous episodes about how crew resource management is very important for drones and drone operations. And this is about, the health of drone, not just the remote pilot, but the entire crew is really important. And the I'm safe checklist is just as important for drones. And there's a whole graphic there with I'm safe for drones.
Well, and I mean, think about it. I mean, some of the drones that are out in the system are fairly large, moving at a fairly high rate of speed.
Yes.
And they can cause damage and
Exactly.
cause safety issues. So I think I read where the number of drones now is 1 million that are certified or registered.
It's
So
way beyond the number of traditional aircraft.
Oh, yes, by a lot. So with all of that, it's important to stress most of the things that we talk about apply to all levels of the industry, to pilots, mechanics, to dispatchers, to drone pilots, everybody involved in aviation. So many of these topics, they might be specific to one issue, but they have more widespread appeal, including how to do a briefing for helicopters.
Yeah, I learned from this article. I've done one helicopter lesson in my life. I really loved it, but I was also trying to do multi-engine training at the same time and sort of winning the lottery. I had to kind of make choices. But I didn't.
So what, you chose not to win the lottery or what?
No, I would love to win the lottery, but I chose not to. I chose to stick with multi-engine training rather than going into rotorcraft. However, I learned a lot of things that I didn't have time to get into with one introductory lesson. But this is 3 tips to brief your helicopter passengers. There were some things in here that, obviously the danger of rotors, but how do you safely enter and exit to avoid blades and how to get out of a damaged helicopter safely. So you talk about pre-flighting the flight, and that is before you go out at all, spend some time in the FBO or someplace else, get and keep their attention. I think that's really the hardest thing about passenger briefings. And then I really thought that these specific instructions for a helicopter passenger briefing were really good. Some of them seem obvious, but, the never approach the tail boom or move behind the rear door. I think you might know that and I might know that, but somebody who's not familiar with rotorcraft would not.
Well, even somebody who's familiar with fixed wing aircraft needs to understand that the helicopter presents unique challenges. The walking into the tail rotor, even if it's not moving, I mean, just the fact that there's the tail rotor hanging down, the concept of the doors and how to secure things. The other thing is, for some helicopters, you don't always get in on the side. You may come in through the back.
There are different ways through,
different entry and exit points. So.
Well, and I think this article also makes a plug for the Rotorcraft Collective video series. And there's one specifically on helicopter passenger management. So if that's something that, if you're going to be a helicopter pilot or a rotorcraft pilot and take passengers, it's worth paying attention to those.
As we, get kind of near the wrap-up point, January, February 8th, this is sort of the, little snippets of news. One that caught my attention was open and closing flight plans via the phone, via the interactive voice response system, which is a new thing. I think in our last issue, we talked about lasers being on the increase, and my goodness, that's such a danger to pilots.
Didn't you have that happen?
I did.
Yeah.
It wasn't my last flight into O'Hare, but it might have been the day before my last flight. I can actually remember the approach into 9 right, just about the time we got over the final approach fix. there was green light flashing in the flight deck. And obviously the first thing you have to make sure is that you don't look down.
Yeah, don't look at it.
You're tempted. Where's that coming from? But don't do that.
Yeah.
Because if you take a direct hit, you're risking some damage. The main thing is to report it. I can assure you that most airports, if you report you just had a laser event or a laser strike, they will immediately tell the airplanes that might be following you of exactly where that was. And I've even heard it on ATIS before, where there've been
laser activity.
Yeah.
So another thing, there's a proposed medical for commercial hot air balloon pilots. And then there are several military airports that have become eligible for funding to add civilian operations. So you get more details in the article.
And one we skipped over was increasing aviation safety in Alaska. That's
yes.
One of the articles, or one of the comments in that article, was that 80% of the communities in Alaska are served by aviation.
By general aviation.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that the things they're working on is, of course, better weather reporting,
like webcam. We've talked about
webcams, and also better charting of terrain and features. So some good information. This is always, the point where we encourage and
absolutely
get feedback.
We get feedback, but you can write to us at safetybriefing@faa.gov. One of our staff routinely monitors the mailbox and takes the comments and letters that we get and ships them around to the rest of the staff. We respond sometimes directly. We then, unless we've been asked not to, we might print at least part of the comment and the response right here in the forum. You can also reach us through Twitter at FAA Safety Brief. We have a Twitter stream and Facebook page and quite a few other means.
And is this monitored on a daily sort of basis?
Absolutely.
Okay. We've talked about this a lot. It's undergone some changes, but it's still important information about how do you get the magazine.
Well, you can get the print edition through the government printing office. I'm going from the bottom up, obviously. You can follow us on Twitter, sign up for email notifications when there is a new issue. I usually do the download in PDF, the mobile, and it has mobile-friendly links to individual features. If you look over on the right-hand side, the screenshot, I had to cut it off, but if you go below what's visible there, it has the links to the mobile-friendly specific articles. Okay. And then what I did there, it's in bold archived issues, so you can go to the archived issues. And there it is. There's the website, so you can just download the PDF for free.
I've actually used the archived issue before because I think we've covered a topic, or I might be interested in some information. It's easy to navigate through. All the issues are there, and it's a great resource, especially if you're an instructor and you might have a topic that you want to expand and teach to a learner. Then you can go back and pick up some of the archived issues.
Yeah, I've actually used it myself. We talk about periodically doing an index, but this day and age, just the archived issues is probably faster than somebody going through an index.
Yeah. Heavy social media presence.
We do. I probably need to update these numbers, but we've already talked about Twitter. We have an active stream there at FAA Safety Brief. There is a specific GA safety group on Facebook. And the whole idea is that you're supposed to be honest and open, and it's moderated to ensure that there's no bad behavior. We contribute to the YouTube GA playlist, to Instagram stories, to the FAA's Medium blog, as well as to the FAA's Facebook stream.
It's a lot. And is that all done by your colleague, Paul Cianciola?
Most of it is. He's the social media outreach person, and he also does the statistics, and I got to ask him to update these numbers because I think they're probably higher.
I'm sure. For which we're appreciative of. That,
yes.
People are using a variety of mechanisms to check in here. Next issue, Just to guess, something maybe about maintenance.
Yeah, the title of it is Meet the Maintainers.
Mhm.
We're going to be talking about, there's an article I edited and reviewed it just the other day that I'm really excited about. I thought it was fascinating. The title is different, but it's something like a day in the life of an AMT.
Mhm.
And it goes through some of the things that an AMT might do and what all goes into the job. The amount that somebody has to know and keep up with, and because things keep changing, to stay current with, if you're in aircraft maintenance, is pretty enormous.
Of course it is, and we're grateful for that. There's so many people out there
Completely.
who are so skilled at this.
And we also talk a little bit more about the Charles Taylor Award, which is it's the maintenance equivalent of the Wright Brothers Award.
Sure.
So there's information about that as well. I think it's shaping up to be a really fun issue.
Well, they all are. I certainly learn a lot by going through them, even for topics that I think I know. I often find something that is a good little tidbit. So,
and we aim for shelf stability so that you can use them as a reference.
That's a nice way of putting it.
Yeah.
So we're back to how to get the wings and AMT credits.
So now that you have taken this course, you can use this two-step process to earn wings and AMT credit. The quiz is 30 questions and it's fairly straightforward. I hope that it will still encourage, even though you can probably pass the quiz just on the basis of having taken this course, we still obviously hope that people will go look at the magazine and read the articles in more depth, because we can't present all of this content in detail in just a single hour.
Well, and you'll need to read the magazine to do the crossword puzzle too.
Yeah, I think you will.
I think so.
And to pull out the crossword puzzle. The podcast, there are quite a few of those, but the page that goes to the archived courses is really great, because it's a big picture of the cover, and then you can just click and go straight to the course. So if you missed one of the previous ones, it's pretty easy to go and look at whichever one or ones that you want to take and get credit for. And then there's the link to the print copy, which is an easy way to get it.
Yeah. So we're starting out 2022 with a good issue, and I know that your team is already working on, issues beyond this.
We are.
We'll be back at a time to be announced for FAA Safety Briefing Live for the April issue.
Yes, indeed.
So we invite you all to tune in, send your feedback, and it's been a pleasure to work with you again, Susan, and
likewise,
and do this. We invite all of you to see us next time, to stay safe and enjoy your flights.
Good night.